you have had a vaccine injury. Is it fair to say that?
Yes, it is.
All right. And I will say I have suffered the accusation of being an anti-vaxxer, which is a preposterous accusation in my case for a number of reasons. I'm one, highly vaccinated against a wide range of things, some of them rather exotic. And two, I'm also a big fan of the idea of vaccination. I think it is incredibly elegant that we can inform the immune system about pathogens that we have not encountered and no ancestor of ours has encountered, so that it will get the jump on those things when we do encounter them. This is a beautiful system, and I in no way am opposed to us wielding it to the medical benefit of people or to the epidemiological benefit of society. Now, I also know you can't possibly be an anti-vaxxer either, because you wouldn't have a vaccine injury if you had been one, because you wouldn't have gotten vaccinated. Is that a fair characterization?
Right. And also, I wasn't in any way required to. That's the other thing. I don't work outside the home. So I suppose you could have someone who was an anti-vaxxer and had their arm twisted, but that wasn't the case. I just went out and decided to do it in my case.
Yes, I very nearly got vaccinated too. I did not, because I was concerned that there were risks that we obviously couldn't rule out early in the process. And so in effect, I was delaying vaccination in order to know more about what happened to people who were vaccinated. And the more I heard, the more alarmed I became. But I'm not an anti-vaxxer. You're not an anti-vaxxer. And when did you get your vaccination?
April 14th.
April 14th. And which one did you get?
It was Pfizer, first dose.
First dose. And did you have your reaction to the first dose, or did you get a second?
I only got the first dose. I had my adverse event in response to that first dose and definitely did not want the second one.
All right. And what was your reaction?
So that very night, I started getting some allergic symptoms, itching ears and head. And then and that was at the same time as the expected things, fatigue and that sort of thing that everybody thought. Within those couple of first days, I started getting nerve pains. And if you've ever had nerve pains, they're very distinctive. They're a zinging feeling. And I would get those in different places of my body. I was a little worried. I thought maybe the shingles that I had the previous year was coming back, but it never developed like shingles. Over the next couple of weeks, I kept having those. I would call them sort of wandering nerve pains. But I didn't get too worried until about 3 weeks later, when it revved, it zinged way up to extreme pain in my back and my tailbone and buttocks and legs. My legs started feeling very heavy, all kinds of things, many different places, zinging in my eyes and my face, and paresthesia in my face and that kind of thing. And basically, to make a long story short, the doctors are baffled. I'm just taking gabapentin for nerve pain at this point, which is not therapeutic. It's just for the pain. And it's been 7 months and nobody's found any effective treatment. And my symptoms just kind of go up and down and up and down and up and down. And I have a terrific amount of pain and nobody seems to have a solution. So I'll keep it that short. There are other symptoms as well, but I don't want to make the list too long. I do have tinnitus, which is somewhat recognized. So maybe some people will recognize that too, just to show the variety of symptoms involved.
Yeah, I've heard terrifying stories of tinnitus beyond what a human being can tolerate. It's really an incredibly frightening thing. I have a certain amount of tinnitus, and I must say most of the time I don't even realize it's there unless I listen for it. But a tinnitus that's absolutely unignorable. I've heard comparisons to freight trains. And
mine is not my worst symptom, but it's, when the other symptoms zoom up, that kind of zooms up too. So,
all right. Now let's be cautious here. Obviously, there is some possibility that what we have is mere coincidence, that something medically anomalous happened to you, and that the coincidence in time of it following your vaccination is not causal, but it seems so because we humans, for very easily understood adaptive reasons, are always looking for connections because very frequently we find them, they are real, and we can make use of them. What can you tell us about the possibility that what you're dealing with is an unfortunate medical situation that doesn't have anything to do with the vaccination you got?
In my own case, I think that's particularly unlikely for several reasons. First of all, my complete good health right up until I went in, and we were even joking about things like, oh, maybe you're going to grow another head or whatever. I mean, I wasn't anxious or anything like that. Secondly, the fact that the initial symptoms did come on along with the expected symptoms, and within that expected 48-hour time window when you do expect to get side effects, and everybody expects to get side effects, and then it seemed to grow out of that. And then thirdly, what I imagine we'll talk about more, which is the similarity to other side effects that I have only subsequently learned about that other people have had.
So, all right, what was your experience in terms of, so you had this event, you got a vaccination that you believed was safe enough to be worth taking and effective enough at something we both agree is dangerous, COVID, that you went and got it, and then you started having reactions, some of them within the range of normal, many of them not within the range of normal and alarming. What did you do next?
You go to doctor after doctor after doctor. Yeah, I got in touch with my primary care doctor. I kept her, very informed. She was very concerned. At first, she urged me to get the second vaccine, but when things got bad enough, she kind of stopped, pushing that. You research, you get online, you Google, you try to figure out what to do. I kept a lot of records of my symptoms, especially in like my messages on the MyChart portal to my doctor. Oh, this new thing has happened. This new thing has happened. Also, we tried Valtrex, which is a antiviral medication in case it was shingles coming back. And so we tried to get right on that. That didn't help. And then the other thing we tried was prednisone, which is an anti-inflammatory, pretty standard anti-inflammatory. That didn't seem to be helping. And then later I had a second round of that at a much higher dose that actually seemed to make matters worse for reasons unknown. So, we did try some reasonable things. And after that, all you can do is keep making appointments with new specialists to see if they'll have any additional ideas. Was
there agreement amongst the doctors that you saw that what you were dealing with was a reaction to the vaccine?
My PCP seemed to think so. She and I both at first thought maybe it was the shingles, because we had heard of shingles being, that was like a known thing that sometimes it brought it back up. But then when there were no lesions and it didn't stay in one place on one side of the body, then we weren't sure what to do. The first immunologist I saw immediately agreed that it was. And in fact, he said verbally to me, this is why we usually test these for 2 to 3 years, because of autoimmune disorders that can arise. I've had one neurologist also say it. I found that other doctors will tend to just record that that's what I said and not necessarily give me a strong opinion one way or another. I mean, I've been lucky that nobody said you're totally crazy, but I don't want to say that they've all just spontaneously, happily agreed that it's what it is. I think there's a certain amount of caution.
All right. You had an immunologist tell you that, as he saw it, this did appear to be a reaction to the vaccine. I will say one of the things that alarmed me was that, given that we couldn't possibly have had any information on the long-term effects of these things, that we were portraying them as safe, which anything that interacts with the immune system and for which we don't have any long-term information about what has happened to people who've taken it can't really be safe, because its whole purpose is to modify this fundamental system. And, we have allergic disorders, we have autoimmunity. There are many ways in which that system can be disrupted in a very negative way. So anyway, interesting to hear that an immunologist saw this as quite likely to be causal.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
All right. So in addition to the doctors that you saw, did you encounter others who had similar stories?
So at first I didn't. I thought of myself as kind of a unicorn, and my family, of course, all believe me, they were appalled, but other immediate members of my family didn't have a problem. So I kept hearing, safe, 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 rare, rare, rare. So I thought, I guess I must just be one of those really, really rare things. And I forget what first prompted me to be, it was just in all the Googling I was doing. I came across the story of a young girl named Maddie de Garay, who is now 13. She was 12. She was in the Pfizer trial for 12 to 15-year-olds. Now, she is in a wheelchair, but various of her symptoms were similar enough to mine, only more extreme, that I said, maybe there are more people out there. So I began looking a little further and eventually got connected with a couple of Facebook groups that are, documenting these things and bringing people together who all claim to have been vaccine injured by these vaccines. And I was just astounded by the similarity.
Let's come back to that in a second. I do want to point out a couple things about the Maddie de Garay story that are worth mentioning. First off, she's very severely injured. She's in a wheelchair. I think you said, as far as we know, she will require one for the rest of her life. She's also on a feeding tube. This is a previously healthy child. In the trial itself, my understanding is that her symptoms caused them to, quote unquote, unblind the study. That is, to reveal that she got the vaccine rather than the placebo immediately, ostensibly so that she could be properly treated. But what this did was it had effects. Again, this is my understanding from others. It had effects on the continuing of the collection of data. So she was recorded as having had stomach upset, when in fact she is crippled and now requiring of a feeding tube and a wheelchair. And so in some sense, this is, yes, an anecdote. It's one individual. And again, there is a remote possibility that something simply coincidental could explain this. On the other hand, healthy children don't suddenly end up in wheelchairs and needing feeding tubes very frequently. This is an extremely rare event. And when we say, well, the trials showed these things to be safe, that depends on the trials having been well done. It depends on things like us continuing to track people whose story does not suggest that they had a smooth ride. And Maddie de Garay's case says exactly the opposite. It says that there are things that we should know that are not widely known. All right. Now, you said you found a Facebook group or several?
Yeah, a couple of them. I was going to mention, too, that if you look up that Pfizer 12 to 15-year-old trial, you will not find it easy to find it mentioned that there was even a single child who had an adverse event this extreme. And adverse events don't have to be designated necessarily as causal. They're just supposed to be recorded. When you do a trial, you just record your adverse events among the test group and your adverse events among the placebo group. And then the idea is, you compare and see if there's a statistically significant difference. You're not supposed to just make up your mind ahead of time, well, this wasn't caused, so we're not going to talk to people about it. And I actually had someone whom I mentioned, Maddie, who went and looked it up, and she said, well, I wonder if her parents are just completely faking this, because I can't find any mention of this in the Pfizer trial. And I'm like, well, that's pretty creepy, because if nothing else, there's nobody who's questioning that she was in the Pfizer trial.
Right.
And so you should at least be able to find it mentioned somewhere other than Fox News that there was a child who was in the Pfizer trial and these events happened while she was in the Pfizer trial.
Right. So
that's really striking.
This gets to questions of epistemology, because at some level, let's give, I won't even call it the benefit of the doubt, because I think it stretches a good bit beyond that. But let's bend over backwards to imagine that this is actually not a meaningful event in some way. All right. it is still important that one child had a serious medical mishap shortly after being vaccinated. Even if these things were unconnected, it is important that that data point land correctly so that we can begin to detect a pattern should it emerge. If what we do is we behave in such a way that that data point vanishes, and she's not really an anecdote. She was a data point. She was in the trial.
She was in the trial. That's right. That's how you do trials.
To the extent that that data point doesn't show up because it was recorded early as a stomach upset, maybe at the point that it plausibly was, but then it developed into a crippling injury, and that happened, after the trial had been unblinded. That is no reason not to maintain that piece of evidence so that we can look at it later if others who were in the trial, for example, show up with a similar set of symptoms. If we disappear that data point, even if we think we're doing the right thing, we have made it impossible for us to recover the pattern later should we need to.
I hope that I am wrong as far as the prevalence of really bad side effects among children. I would love for it to be the case that just as children don't get COVID as badly as a lot of adults, they maybe will also not get side effects as badly as adults. I don't think we can infer the one from the other at all. It doesn't seem to me medically. So I hope we don't get some explosion, but in a dark way, a very dark way, it will be interesting to see what happens if we start getting a very large number of anecdotes of children ages 5 through 11 having terrible, terrible side effects, and the medical establishment saying, la, 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 I can't hear you, or the government establishment saying, I can't hear you. Is that going to change anything? Is anything going to happen to make them change course? I don't know.
Well, unfortunately, I think the Maddie de Garay story,
it's a bad sign, isn't it?
It's an awful sign. And I would also say that no matter what, we are again in the same circumstance where you can tell we have no reason to believe that vaccinating these children is safe. It doesn't mean it will be harmful, but it means that we cannot rule out that it will be harmful. And there are signs that mean that we should be very concerned. And because healthy children are not severely harmed by COVID, it is it is an evil choice for us to be making. And the fact that after ignoring a large group of people who appears to have been injured by vaccines that they were told were safe and effective, at seeing that not only have these vaccines failed with regard to safety, but they also have failed with respect to effectiveness. The fact that we're talking about boosters being necessary for people 6 months down the road, this tells us that safe and effective didn't turn out to be right. And the people who assured us that that was true either knew better and lied, or they didn't know better and should have.
And they were caught by surprise, and now they're going to just double down and say, well, then I guess we just got to do it.
I guess my point would be, though, it's not doubling down when you add children to the mix, right? That is ratcheting up. That is a new level of indifference to potential harm.
It is, and it will be, I fear, indifference to actual harm. The other thing that strikes me, and maybe has a little bit of an echo of communism, and I hesitate to use this word, but you'll see where I'm going with it in a minute, is that the de Garays were so pro-vax that they entered 3 of their children into the trial. Maddie volunteered. From the story that I've heard is that 2 of her siblings were going to be in the trial, and they apparently were fine. And then she said, I want to help too, because I want to help to end the pandemic. And her parents were thrilled to let her do it. And then this happened, and her parents are like, oh my goodness, this happened to us. And the fact that they were so committed to the system was not good enough to get them listened to. Okay. And so I think we find that where we have people who've been sort of mugged by reality, and they were loudly in affirmation of the system. Like people who were like, I'm a good Soviet comrade. Please listen to me. Our food supply system is not working or whatever. I'm trying to help the party. Right. And then it was like, we don't want to hear what you're saying. Shut up. So it's, the odd thing is you would maybe have thought that the depth of commitment that this family had to the vaccination efforts, even for COVID specifically, would have won them a hearing, but it did not.
It's a terrifying, terrifying point, right? These are people who more than did their part, right? And if anyone is deserving of being listened to, being treated at the highest possible level, being heralded as a hero. I mean, if anybody is a hero of this pandemic, this little girl is. She volunteered to test a vaccine so that the pandemic could be ended. Was injured, right? This is a fallen soldier at some level. How dare we? How dare we ignore her? That's it's a very upsetting point. I had not thought about it that way, but my God.